Welcome, folks. Hopefully you've had a chance to join us for today, and as Kelly said, this is our fifth and last online session for today, and wow, it's been a great day so far, so really looking forward to hearing from Alastair. Alastair Young is Associate Director for SFT, the Scottish Futures Trust, and Alastair and I were just talking about past and things, and Alastair's been with the organisation for quite some time, but has a wealth of experience in infrastructure projects across Scotland, both in the public and private sector. Scotland Exeter has been working with SFT, as have many of you, for a number of years also, and we all have a great relationship. Alastair's going to talk to us about a really interesting topic today, the topic of EV and charging. And I know it's a really, really topical subject just now. And I know, looking at councils, I know people like Dundee are charging ahead, in Aberdeen, really exciting projects. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from Alastair and what he's got to say. As ever, folks, we'll take questions at the end of the session. And I'm going to hand over now to Alastair.
Oh, thank you very much, and hopefully you can see my presentation on screen there. So
yes, we
good
can.
Afternoon, and thank you very much to Excel for giving me the opportunity to share with you the work that Scottish Futures Trust is doing with Transport Scotland and all 32 local authorities to expand the availability of public EV charging across Scotland. The theme of today's conference is being commercial, and the expansion of Scotland's public EV charging network is certainly one where we need to take a commercially focused approach. Over the next few minutes, I'll share with you the background as to why we need to expand Scotland's EV charging network and some of the issues we face to enable a commercially viable and customer-focused network over the coming years. So for those of you not familiar with Scottish Futures Trust, we are an organisation owned by the Scottish Government, but operating very much at arm's length from government. We work with public and private sectors to maximise the benefits from infrastructure projects across Scotland. I'm here today to share with you the work that we do in the transport decarbonisation sector, but you'll see from the slide that there are several areas of work that cut across many of the key aspects of infrastructure delivery in Scotland. And for those of you who are interested, a copy of our business plan is available on our website. Just Google SFT. The transport sector is one of the major contributors to greenhouse gas emissions in the United Kingdom, and surface transport is the biggest contributor of greenhouse gas emissions from the overall transport sector. The black line on this slide illustrates how CO2 emissions from the transport sector have changed over the last 15 years. There was obviously a dip during the pandemic, but slightly disappointing to see that emissions from the transport sector have largely flatlined over the past 15 years and potentially are on an upward rather than downward trend. If we're to meet our carbon reduction targets, there's a need for a societal shift away from the reliance on surface transport to more sustainable forms of transport, which include, wherever possible, replacing internal combustion engines with low or zero emission forms of transport. Most of you will be familiar with the big push to adopt electric cars. You can't sit in front of the TV of an evening without seeing an advert for manufacturers' new electric vehicles. Obviously, all of these need to be charged, and figures from the Committee of Climate Change suggest that progress to date has been good, but we need to develop a step change in the rate of installation of charging infrastructure and a step change in the quality and the reliability of that service that is provided to customers. So this is not just an infrastructure problem, this is a societal change and transformation opportunity. We're asking people to change how they go about their daily lives and how they go about driving around Scotland for work and for leisure, and how industries and businesses transport goods and services to their customers. So how many charge points does Scotland need? You would think that would be a relatively simple equation, but it's not. You've seen the figures from the Climate Change Committee on my previous slide, but depending on what scenario you adopt, those numbers can vary quite significantly. This slide illustrates the outputs from modelling done by an organisation called Cenex, who've developed a toolkit available to all local authorities to help them understand the uptake of electric vehicles in their localities and the amount of infrastructure that could be required depending on a range of scenarios. And what I'm trying to illustrate here is, depending on what scenario you adopt, the number and type of charge points that we need can vary quite significantly. One of the things I've learned from working on this sector is some stakeholders want to hang on to a number, and if that number is not met, it's perceived as failure. In this industry, which is a new sector and a new asset class, I do think we need to transition away from success being defined by numbers and think about, are we getting the right infrastructure in the right place to meet customers' needs? Whilst I advocate the maxim of having the right charger in the right place, we still need a massive expansion of public EV charging over the next 5 to 10 years. Just by way of comparison, this slide illustrates where Scotland is in comparison to Norway. Norway and Scotland have similar populations and similar geographies, but you can see here that Norway has made a concerted effort to increase the uptake of electric vehicles and significantly invest in charging infrastructure, which shows you how far we have to go. With any procurement programme and programme of investment, it's important that we have a clear vision of what success looks like. I would argue in any sector, having a common understanding of the outcomes we're looking to achieve is fundamental to the commercial strategies to delivering infrastructure that's necessary to realise those outcomes. Last year, the Scottish Government published its vision for public EV charging in Scotland. This signal visioned the need to focus Scotland's network on being customer-focused and pivoting away from a largely public sector-led and publicly funded EV charging network to one which capitalises on private sector funding and expertise. As we pivot away from a publicly funded and publicly delivered EV charging service, we're beginning to see the role of the public sector as being one that is focusing on enabling a network which works in the best interests of customers. I think this is an area where we'll see continual development of regulation, which is focused not on the quantity of charging infrastructure per se, but on the quality and reliability of that service that is available across the United Kingdom. Last year, the UK government published the public charge point regulations, which are very much targeted at opening up networks and making them accessible to a range of customers. Knowing the regulatory landscape and how it's likely to evolve is a key aspect to thinking commercially and how we shape future contracts for works and services in an environment which is not only subject to technology change, but regulatory change as well. This slide illustrates the process that we're going through at the moment and how we're moving from an environment where initially there was limited uptake of electric vehicles by the early adopters to one where over a period of time the purchase and use of electric vehicles will become very much mainstream. In the early stages of that transition to new forms of transportation, there was a fundamental role for the public sector to enable that change. And as I've discussed previously, we're now past that tipping point where the public sector can transition away from being a deliverer and funder of services to one where it's an enabler and facilitator and regulator of services provided by the private sector. You've heard me talk about putting the customer first, which I think is a central aspect of thinking commercially when delivering new infrastructure initiatives. In terms of the EV charging sector, current and future drivers want to be assured and have the confidence that they can get from A to B. They don't want to run out of charge, and when they turn up to a charge point, they want to be assured that it's available and easy to use, it's reliable, it's not broken down, and it's accessible to their type of vehicle. If they have mobility problems or concerns about accessibility, that they have the equal opportunity to use that infrastructure as anybody would. In terms of cost, is it affordable? Is it more affordable than petrol and diesel? And are there convenient and user-friendly forms of payment available? In delivering the transition to net zero, whether it's decarbonising transport or the way in which we heat our homes, there will be a key role for the public sector in enabling that change and transition. When we're thinking about how we deliver a new asset class or a new service, we need to take cognizance of the resources and the skills that are available within the public sector to effect that transition. In the current financial environment, where budgets are very tight, there are opportunities to bring together the skills and funding available within the public sector to avoid unnecessary duplication of effort and build the capacity and skills in the public sector to embrace new delivery models and partnerships with the private sector. Expanding Scotland's public EV charging network is new, and as we take new opportunities to the market, we need to work in partnership with charge point operators and their supply chains, and to make sure we're developing procurement strategies and tender documents and draft contracts which they are able to bid for. In the public sector, our scale provides the opportunity for us to be a very powerful buyer of goods and services. But in this new market, where the whole of the UK are chasing suppliers of kit and equipment, as well as alternative sources of funding, we need to listen to what their concerns are and what they perceive to be the barriers to delivery. There is a case to be said that in this sector, we need the market more than the market needs us. As new players enter the market, they will pick and choose. They will prioritise where they target their resources and capital. Therefore, there's an opportunity within Scotland for us to put our best foot forward and evidence that Scotland is an attractive place to invest by showing that we are listening to the concerns of industry and raising and addressing the barriers to successful delivery of new initiatives. Interestingly, feedback from the market in this sector is not one of a lack of funding, but more one of addressing the interfaces with stakeholders that are necessary to make this initiative happen, and having a transparent and visible pipeline of opportunities so they can resource accordingly. On the subject of thinking commercially, how best can the public sector respond? To me, collaboration should be at the heart of everything we're looking to do. Given the constraints we have in the public sector in terms of access to capital and competing demand on the human resource to deliver an ever-increasing number of complex policy initiatives, I think it's incumbent on the public sector to look at ways that they can share resources and budgets to bring new initiatives to the market. Collaboration also has other benefits in terms of being able to bring a portfolio of opportunities to the market to support the principles of a just transition and to enable a more comprehensive network of charging infrastructure of Scotland to emerge through bundling through bundling areas which are commercially attractive, with areas that may be less commercially attractive through taking a portfolio approach. There's also the question of scale and presenting attractive propositions to the market. I sometimes think it's a bit like the Goldilocks test, not too big, not too small, just right. But looking at the competing opportunities that are likely to emerge south of the border, collaboration can help build a meaningful and successful pipeline of opportunities for the private sector in Scotland. And on that subject of collaboration, I'm really delighted and encouraged to see that we're making a significant amount of inroads on the collaboration agenda across Scotland as they seek to expand public EV charging services in their regions. We support Transport Scotland in the management and delivery of their electric vehicle infrastructure fund and provide support to all 32 local authorities as they develop new delivery models. What we're seeing from that work is that there's no shortage of ambition in the public sector to embrace change, and a potential for a multi-million-pound investment programme emerging, which is largely funded by the private sector. This will not only help tackle climate change, but also will help create opportunities for employment and economic growth. I've mentioned before that as we transition away from a publicly led, publicly funded model, we need to look at developing new models of delivery that can leverage private investment. To help build that capacity and enable change, we've developed templates and guidance that local authorities can refer to develop local solutions that can meet the needs of their communities. We also work very closely with our counterparts south of the border, who have also developed an extensive knowledge repository of guidance and information which is available to all local authorities in Scotland as well. I think when we're trying to be commercial and deliver new works and services, it's really important that we foster an environment of shared learning so that we can enable everybody to make the transition as quickly and as efficiently as possible. It would not be appropriate for me to give a presentation on electric vehicle charging without talking about the very emotive subject of how much drivers pay to charge their vehicles. In the early years of introducing public charging in Scotland, charging services were available free. That was a good thing to do at a point in time to encourage early adopters to embrace change, but as we move to mainstream adoption of electric vehicles, the charging infrastructure has to generate enough income such that it is commercially viable. This means not only thinking about the revenue that will be generated to fund the initial installation costs, but the revenue that will be necessary to pay for all the ongoing operation and maintenance costs, as well as the costs for paying for the electricity necessary to charge the vehicles. With public EV charging being delivered by local authorities initially being free of charge or at very low cost, one of the key things we've been keen to do is make sure that infrastructure owned and operated by the public sector competes on a level playing field with those owned and operated by the private sector. As we move to an environment where we need to mobilise significant levels of private sector investment, we need to give the market confidence that they will be able to compete on a level playing field. The private sector can't compete against heavily subsidised services, which is a major deterrent to their investment. So as we think about how we take new works and services to the market and how we think commercially, I think one of the things that we can do in the public sector is to try and create a level playing field for investment, promote competition and choice for consumers in the provision of new goods and services. So to try and wrap all this up under the strapline of being commercial, my key learning points and observations from my time in the EV charging sector are, firstly, put the customer at the heart of everything you do. This is not solely about delivering infrastructure for infrastructure's sake. It's about creating an environment that gives consumers and customers the confidence to embrace change. Speak to the market. We can't do this on our own. We need to understand what are their pressures, pinch points and red flags, and as far as possible design procurements and contracts that enable the private sector to bid on a competitive basis and deliver works and services that are sustainable for the long term. As the market expands, I would suggest that the role of the public sector is not so much to subsidise future investments by the private sector, but to look at how they can target their resources to create the conditions for the private sector to invest. This could be making sure that stakeholders have adequate resources to process all the connections, consents and permissions and regulations that will need to be enabled, and that the public bodies have the capacity and the skills to facilitate change. I've talked about collaboration as a central theme to enable change, and certainly in a new sector, you should always seek to share learning as far as possible. And for the generic aspects of delivery that only need to be done once, develop common and standardised approaches and conditions that can help take the strain out of procurement. To attract private sector investment into Scotland, there are many benefits in communicating a sustainable pipeline of investment that can enable a private sector operators to establish local supply chains. And if they have the confidence, they can build local supply chains knowing that there's a good probability of a growing pipeline of work. And my last 2 points, which I think are really important, and what I've observed from the EV charging sector, is that there's a lot of anxiety and concern about potentially making the wrong decision. I would argue that the only wrong decision is no decision. We need to embrace those that are willing to take the steps to deliver change based on the best information available at a point of the time, learn from their experiences and celebrate their successes. That's my whistle-stop tour of my reflections on the EV charging sector. I hope you found that informative, and I would be delighted to take questions.
Thank you, Alastair. We'll open up for questions now, and we'll put them in either the chat or, folks, if you can put your hand up, we'll do that. I've got a first question to start us off. So you showed us Roger's innovation curve, and I'm guessing that Scotland is probably in the early adopters phase just now, I'm guessing. But the Norway numbers were quite distinctly different from Scotland. Are you aware, did Norway do anything to accelerate people along the curve, or did they do something different? Any thoughts on that?
Well, Norway has embraced the electric vehicle agenda for quite some considerable period of time. I think there has been incentives in terms of the cost of buying vehicles, other policy initiatives in terms of parking and driving into low emission zones. So there's been a number of policy levers which the Norwegian administration has adopted, which maybe the UK government and the Scottish government could look to help accelerate that delivery. I do think, though, from what I hear from Norway, whilst they are significantly further along that journey, if we pardon the transport pun, they haven't necessarily got it perfect, and everybody's on a learning journey as well. Okay.
Alastair, there's a first point in the chat here, and it's from Katie McCauley, and she's talking about, I guess, the construction of the battery components and some of those rare fine metals that are used to create the batteries and the potential environmental impacts. Any thoughts on
that? Slightly out with my area of expertise. Certainly that is a genuine concern. We need to make sure that the whole industry is sustainable and conscious of its environmental impact. My only observation would be that as this industry becomes more mainstream, there will be people out there that innovate in terms of how we produce more sustainable products and recycling and repurposing old products and disposing of waste materials in a sustainable manner, but not really my area of expertise.
Okay, thanks, Alastair. Next question's in from Nicola in North Ayrshire. Is the market restricted in any way based on exclusivity deals? Sorry, just moved. When it comes to service and maintenance?
It's really up to the purchasers of services how they define the terms of their contract. If they see there is benefits in offering service providers a degree of exclusivity for a period of time that offers better value for money, then that may be a good thing to do. But it is a moot point as to how far you go in offering exclusivity. What we want in Scotland is for consumers to have choice. You just think about how we fuel petrol and diesel cars, that consumers have choice. We want to try and replicate that market. So we've got to be careful that we don't sleepwalk into offering people too much exclusivity too soon and create local monopolies.
Okay, so Nicola actually went on to say that it's a situation that they've experienced and curious whether it's across the country. And I know Nicola's not a shy, retiring individual, so maybe if you put a hand up and maybe talk a wee bit more about it if you want, Nicola. If not, I'll move on to the next question in the meantime. And the next question is from Maureen. Oh, Nicola's put a hand up, so we'll come back to Nicola in a second. So first of all, Maureen, given utilisation of existing charges is often below 10%, why are we pushing for more chargers?
Part of it is about having the right charger in the right place. That there will be communities where charging infrastructure utilisation will always be relatively low, and in some parts of Scotland may not be commercially viable for a considerable period of time. What we're trying to do is provide a comprehensive network such that people can confidently journey from Stranraer to Thurso. And it doesn't matter what part of the country you live in, you have an equal opportunity to embrace the transition to zero emission vehicles.
Okay, thank you, Alastair. Alastair, hopefully the guys have opened up Nicola's session. Nicola, do you want to switch your camera on or speak?
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you fine, Nicola. Thank you.
Right, that's fine. It was in regards to, like, we have had charge points installed by a provider, and then later down the line when we're out of contract, we're trying to get the service and maintenance agreements, but we're told that no one else can touch them apart from the person who'd put them in without trying to break deals. We don't know how possible it is for these deals to be broken. So it's between like Swarco and a third party, etc. So I don't know if that explains further the situation we're in. So we just feel that we're tied to one person. I don't know how real it is to get out of
that. Without seeing the details of the contract, it's very difficult to comment. But it is an issue that I understand is not uncommon. That we've with the best of intention at the point in time installed charge points and entered into maintenance agreements, and as we look to move to mass adoption, a number of local authorities are thinking about a different delivery model based on a concession or service type contract. So there is a moot point as to what you do with the 2,800 publicly owned and publicly operated public EV charging points, and the maintenance agreements that exist with those. Are they innovatable? Are they transferable? Or do we just have to wait for them to expire and ride them out and allow a new charge point operator to come in? What we're finding is that some charge point operators are quite happy to take on board somebody else's kit and equipment and take that maintenance and reliability responsibility. Some people won't touch them with a barge pole. It's a really complex area we need to work through.
So I think it sounds like that, Alastair. And interestingly, in the chat, we've had 3 other council areas saying similar problems. So Dundee, Perth and Kinross and Murray. So perhaps it's one for offline. And I know you know Grant, and maybe we can talk about that a bit further if there are some challenges there and things that we can recommend. I'm going to come back to a previous question. I think it was from Maureen. And that was about, are there any innovations in terms of charging points for people living in flatted accommodation?
Maybe not particularly about flatted accommodation, but the whole issue of people that don't have access to off-street parking is one of the key aspects of the electric vehicle charging infrastructure fund that we're trying to address. So, looking at provision of on or just off-street charging hubs, whether that could be in local authority car parks or in car parks associated with, say, RSLs or in other publicly accessible areas. So that's one of the things we're trying to address. Interestingly, for maybe not so much on flatted properties, but maybe terrace properties, for those that don't have access to off-street parking, we're seeing a number of people innovating in the cross pavement type solutions. You have to get a better way of describing that, but you're seeing entities that have solutions that basically cut a trench in the pavement so that people can get a cable safely across the pavement to access their vehicles. Obviously, there's a lot of issues with that in terms of health and safety and liabilities, in terms of trips and falls, etc., etc. And then issues in terms of, well, does that person then acquire a right to that parking space outside their house? But you're seeing a lot of people innovating in these cross-pavement type solutions for those that don't have access to off-street parking.
Okay.
One of them was on Dragon's Den.
Nicola's just popped out in this chat. The other one was in Dragon's Den. Another great question. Before the call, we just briefly touched on the idea about concession contracts. Derek's asked a question on that in the chat and talking about any experience in what's best for long-term commitments, 10 to 20 years on concession contracts, often in an area, in a market that is ripe for change over the coming years. And 10 to 20 years seems like a lifetime when it comes to procurement.
Yeah, it does, and it's a really, really good question. I'm glad somebody brought that up. It's a concern that we're seeing that a lot of local authorities have about entering into long-term contracts. couple of things I would say. So if it is a concession contract procured under the Concession Contract Scotland regulations, the length of the contract should only be as long as necessary to repay to have enough time to generate enough income to repay the upfront investment costs and make a reasonable return on investment. So it shouldn't be longer than necessary. But this is a significant undertaking and a significant level of investment. And sometimes I say, we all would have liked to have paid off our mortgages in 5 years, but we couldn't have afforded the monthly repayments. It's a similar thing here. Charge point operators are looking to invest in advance, largely in advance of need, before we hit mass adoption. So they're playing a long-term game. So they are saying to us they need 15, ideally 20 years to be able to generate enough income to pay off the initial investment costs and make a reasonable return on their investment. What I would say from local authorities' perspectives is that it's not actually local authorities that are buying the service here. Under a concession contract, theoretically, they are enabling a third party to provide services to the general public on their land. So if the successful tenderer gets their figures wrong, then in the worst case scenario, what would happen, and let's hope this never does happen, the entity may go bust, and then all the land reverts back to the local authority. The local authority should not be exposed to any costs and liabilities, and is not under a statutory obligation to provide that service, like providing a school or another community facility. This is why I think it's important that, because we've got such an environment where there's technology change and regulatory change, who is best placed to take that risk? Is it the public sector or is it the private sector? I'll leave others to be the judge on where you think that lands. Okay,
Alastair, thank you. Alastair, I think that's all the questions that have come through. I don't think I've missed anybody, and thank you for that link to the Dragon's Den thing. I'm sure I would have done have a look at that. So thank you very much. Some really good questions there. I started off in introduction and talk about this being a very topical subject, and I think it is, and I think we'll hear a lot more about it. We'll be certainly talking a lot more about it, and I'm sure we'll see more with you on that, Alastair. So, Kelly.
Hi.
Kelly's just hand up, so.
Hi. Daniel O'Donnell had put a question in the chat, but it's quite a few had come in. So it's right. One in relation to the national grid. Alastair, so asking, do the national grid sit in any working groups? As it seems the infrastructure delivery programme can only be carried out in line with the national grid capacity. So what has the discussion been with regards to that?
Yeah, no, another very, very good question. Excuse me. We are in discussion with the two principal distribution network operators, SSEN and SPEN. SSEN and SPEN have been provided funding through their 5-year regulatory settlement to set up resources and teams which they call EV optimizers to engage with local authorities to help enable that planning, to understand where there are pinch points on the network, so we can program and prioritize our investment. There is a stakeholder group, I must get the acronym right, the Local Electric Connection Charging Group, if I've got that right, which meets periodically to try and look at strategically how we can break down the barriers to enabling grid connection. So it's happening. We're on the journey, to use a transport pun. We're just not quite there yet. Okay, thank you, Alastair. And Daniel, apologies I missed your thing there. And Kelly, thank you for keeping me right. And I think that is all the questions now. So, Alastair, thank you very much for your time. I thought that was a really good questions we have from the audience there as well, and it really helped to inform us going forward. So, thank you very much. I guess this is our last session, folks, and hopefully if you've joined us for the whole day, thanks to everyone for attending. I think you'll agree if you were there, we've had 5 different topics, 5 different speakers, or a number of different speakers. And it's been really interesting, and I personally have really enjoyed it. I think we're all really stuck in the day job, all of us,
and getting time out in a day to hear from some really informed speakers like Alastair gives us some food for thought and helps us share some of that good practice across the wider public sector as well. So everything today has been recorded. Everything will be made available via the Academy, and we'll notify you when that's possible. We really hope you've enjoyed it, the topics and the speakers. Again, I mentioned this before. I know a number of these topics we've ran, they're fairly short. If you enjoyed them, if you want more information, let us know. I'm sure if we wanted, Alastair would come back and we'll spend a bit more time and get maybe more people involved and maybe spend 2 or 3 hours on the topics. So these things are always open. And I guess lastly, thank you to everyone involved in today and organising the day, and thank you all and have a great day. Thanks again, Alastair.
Thank you.
Bye
everybody.